All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Did a Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing along the path of racial identity in D&D. More specifically, we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of the choice of your race when you are creating your character. And for this little mini series, we're focusing on the races that should show up specifically in the PHB. And yeah, we're just gonna go from there. So yeah, the next race we're going to deal with is the dwarf. Dwarves are another one of those like classic fantasy races. When most people think of like high fantasy settings, they generally going to think something like Tolkien-esque, which inspired a lot of D&D. Another thing that's really common, and he happened to be a really good friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, is C.S. Lewis's Narnia series. Is another one that people think of when they think of like fantasy stuff, depending on when you started reading fantasy. And yeah, so the big races that you tend to see in almost every single fantasy style game are always going to be dwarves and elves. In general, they tend to be opposed to each other in some way. Sometimes it's fervent, like warlike. Sometimes it's just like they don't like each other. But there always seems to be some sort of rift between dwarves and elves in fantasy. And the dwarves that are shown off in the PHB are your very stereotypical dwarves. Now, again, I'm going to be talking about the specific things that are listed in the PHB. There are a lot of ways to customize your race. Tasha's Culture of Everything introduced some massive ways to kind of change how the races will work. So if you do want to play against type, you can. This is just kind of your stereotypical dwarf and how it kind of fits into D&D. So, quick reminder of the things that every single race has. You have an ability score increase of some thing. They're going to give you age, alignment, size, and speed. And that's just to kind of help you visualize what your character is like and maybe kind of plan their life, because really young races are going to have much less they could have done in their life, whereas really old races might have had almost an entire lifetime before they started venturing. And then you will have your specific traits for the race, which generally will allow you to do different things or maybe give you different proficiencies, things like that. And those are generally going to be the big things, other than the ability scoring increase, that you're going to be using in game that will really benefit you. For dwarf traits, first things first, the ability score increase is different than what we dealt with the Dragonborn. The Dragonborn in the PHB only has one race. Now, we did talk about in Exandria they had some other races, but those don't quite work as sub races. They replace things and to change things. The dwarf, along with a lot of other races in the PHB, actually has what's called a sub race, where you would pick dwarf, and then you also get to pick either hill dwarf or mountain dwarf, and both of those are going to actually give you an additional ability score increase, and some other kind of specialized things just for that sub race. So you get a little bit of customization within the dwarf race. The ability score increase for just all dwarves is you get Constitution +2. Now, There are no classes that Constitution is part of, like their attack rolls or their spell casting or anything like that. We did talk about Dragonborn, where their Constitution helped with their breath attack, but you can't be both a Dragonborn and a Dwarf. So yeah, Constitution is not going to increase any of the things people normally think about when they're looking at their ability score increase and how they're going to use it as part of their class. However, Constitution is just good for every single class. Constitution is your hit points. And increasing your Constitution score by 2, no matter what the actual score is, means you will increase your total hit points by 1 hit point per level. So at level 1, that's just 1 extra hit point. That's not really a big deal. At level 10, that's 10 extra hit points. At level 20, that's 20 extra hit points. That's an entire hit that you can now negate simply because of your starting thing. So Constitution is always useful. In addition, barbarians are kind of built for Constitution. Their natural armor. Thank you for the phone. Their natural or their unarmored defense is kind of similar to the monk unarmored defense. We've talked about both of them, but instead of adding their wisdom to their armor class, they add their Constitution. So if you wanted like a class that's really going to take a lot of advantage of the dwarfs, dwarfs ability score increase, making a Dwarven barbarian makes sense. They're going to be harder to hit because of that. They're going to have more hit points, which barbarians are made to soak up damage because their rage gives them resistance against most physical damage, things like that. So Dwarven barbarians can actually be really useful. We even talked about in the Sword Coast Adventures guide, there is a Dwarven barbarian subclass of barbarian that requires you to be a dwarf, the battle rager. So Dwarven barbarians are not uncommon at all in lore. In gameplay, from my own experience, I don't see anywhere near as many dwarf barbarians as I think I should, which kind of surprises me with how well dwarves kind of fit that. I generally tend to see a lot more half-orc barbarians. We'll talk about why when we get to them. And then human barbarians, and we'll talk about why when we get to them. But yeah, so Constitution, good for everyone, but it excels the most as a barbarian. Age, dwarves mature at the same rate as humans, but they're considered young until they reach the age of 50. And on average, they live to about 350 years. So dwarves are one of the longer-lived races. They're not quite as long-lived as like elves. But it means that physically, an 18-year-old dwarf is going to look like kind of like a short 18-year-old human. And one in his 20s and 30s and 40s is going to look very similar. However, because their lifetime is extended, what happens generally is you reach adulthood around, anywhere between 15 to 25, depending on whose numbers you're using. And then dwarves will simply stop, not really aging, but stop showing their age quite as much, to where a 60-year-old human is going to have wrinkles and is probably going to have at least their hair is going to be start graying if it hasn't gone completely gray or white by 60. I know quite a few 60-year-olds that still have a full head of hair and still have color in their hair. But it's relatively rare. With a dwarf, they're not going to start showing their age until their mid-100s. Maybe even after 200 years, they're going to start showing their age. And then once they get to the 300-year range, that's when you start seeing them retire and the things like that. And again, you can use that to kind of help design your character. Thank you for the phone. I don't need more stuff. Alignment, we don't care because alignment has always been a good guideline. Size, they're between 4 to 5 feet tall. and they are medium, which is, again, just about everyone. And then speed is 25 feet. I've mentioned before, shorter races, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, are going to have a shorter speed. Specifically because they're shorter, their legs are shorter, so they just can't go as far. However, something unique about the dwarf, your speed is not reduced by wearing heavy armor. And that is very unique. One of the big pitfalls of wearing heavy armor in general is heavy armor has a strength score tied to it, where if your strength is not above that, your speed is reduced, which isn't good. The less and less you can move, the less you're going to be able to do during combat. And again, action economy wise, if your movement is not getting you to a point where you can use your action versus something, your team is into trouble. So, dwarves don't need to have a high strength score to wear heavy armor. Now, a lot of people will think, well, it doesn't really matter. If you're wearing heavy armor, you're probably going to have a high strength score anyways, because dex doesn't add into anything for it. As far as your armor class is concerned, so this is kind of minor. Not really. Because when you look at the fact that if you wanted to take a feat to get the ability for a class that normally can't wear heavy armor to wear heavy armor, you don't have to worry about being super slow because of it. And therefore, you could have a really, really high dex score and be a ranger that wears heavy armor and is really, really hard to hit. Or you could be a wizard or a sorcerer that wears heavy armor and doesn't really have a high dex score, but they put all of their points into charisma or into intelligence so that they can cast spells really well. And not only are they really, really good at doing damage, but they're also really, really hard to hit. Kind of fix that squishiness of a caster. That's just really, really useful, and a lot of people just kind of overlook it when they really shouldn't. And then we get to something that's technically not a specific feature of dwarves, but it's something you either have or you don't, and that is Darkvision. When we talked about the dwarf last time, or not the dwarf, the Dragonborn last time, we didn't mention Darkvision because Dragonborn don't get Darkvision, which means when it's dark, they need some sort of light source or else they can't see anything. The way Darkvision works is it's 60 feet, and you can see in dim light as if it were bright light, and you can see in darkness as if it were dim light. And you can't discern color in darkness, only shades of gray. So everything turns grayscale when it's really dark, but you can still see for up to 60 feet. As a shadow monk, one of the spells you can replicate with Kikiki is Darkvision, and it is one of the most useful things when I used to play my shadow monk, because at the beginning of the adventuring day, before we'd start going anywhere, I would go, okay, who doesn't have the Darkvision? They go, okay, and I'd spend 2 key points on every person in the party that didn't have Darkvision, and the spell Darkvision lasts for 8 hours, and then we would take a short rest, and I would get all my key points back, and we would have an entire party of people with the Darkvision without having to worry about their race, and then we could go delving into dungeons and that, and not have to have a light, which would tell enemies where we are. Thank you to the tablet. So Darkvision, very, very useful. It's not the be-all, end-all, because you can get quite a few different things that will give you the Darkvision, but it's nice to have it built in. All right, so now we go to specific Dwarven traits. The first Dwarven trait they have is called Dwarven Resilience, which is you have advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance against poison damage. Poison is an interesting thing. At low levels, poison is really, really bad. because a lot of times when you're dealing with monsters that deal with poison, they'll do regular damage to you, and then they will tack on additional poison damage that makes them really, really bad. And generally, poison saves, in order to avoid the extra poison damage, you have to make a poison save, which is a Constitution saving throw. We've already talked about dwarves have higher constitutions, so it's easier for them to resist poison saves. They have advantage on saving throws against poison. That includes the condition poison and just poison damage. Because if it meant one or the other, it would say you have advantage on saving throws against poison damage or against the poison condition. So, yeah. And then resistance against poison damage. It means even if you do get failure save, you're going to be taking half damage. And then if you do make your save, you take half damage, depending on the ability, and then half that again, because that's just how it works. So that can be really useful at lower levels. As you get to higher levels, though, classes start gaining immunity to poisons. I know monks at level, I want to say it's either 7 or 9, get immunity to poison. So poison damage, poison condition, they don't get hurt. I think paladins get it to 2. There's lots of spells that can give you resistance to poison. So higher level monsters generally don't use a ton of poison because there's so many ways to get around it. But for low level characters, all the way up through tier 2 effectively, poison is a really, really dangerous thing to deal with. And because most adventures in D&D tend to go around tier 2, which is 5 to 10, maybe up to a little into tier 3, up to about level to the 12, it means for most of your campaigning, you're going to be doing pretty well with that. Next is Dwarven Combat Training, which gives you proficiency in Battle Axe, Hand Axe, Light Hammer, and Warhammer. This is another thing that people just kind of gloss over because they don't really see it as, oh, this is something I can use in battle. Most people, when they think of using any of those weapons, they think of classes that already use them. It's like fighter already has proficiency in martial weapons, which is all of those. So it's just double proficiency, which doesn't do anything. Your proficiency doesn't increase just because you get it from 2 different sources. Or barbarian. Again, we talked about dwarven barbarians. And that's all they really think about. But this does mean that you can create some more unique looking characters that you normally wouldn't see. Like maybe having a wizard that uses a warhammer. Because you don't have to take an extra feat for it or anything like that. You just have proficiency with it. And if there is a magic item that appeared in Xanathar's, it's basically a stone that you attach to a weapon that allows you to use it as a spellcasting focus. If you can get this magic item, which it's a common magic item, so it's not even something that should be difficult to find in any world. If you get this magic item, you can turn I believe it has to be a mundane weapon, though I'm not 100% certain. It may work on magic items. I actually don't remember. But basically, if you want to use a warhammer as your casting focus, or a battle axe as your casting focus, you can. With this, without having to take any extra feats or anything like that. Again, when we talk about the heavy armor, you can create something a bit more akin to a melee mage without having to go path of the war mage or something. Like you could be an evocation mage that wields a warhammer and wears heavy armor using just 1 feat. Now, you may be wondering how that works because it takes other armor proficiencies. We'll talk about that a little later in the dwarf section. But there are ways to do it being a dwarf. So whenever you see something like combat training, which there's a couple different races that have this combat training built into them, don't just think about, well, I'm already going to be a fighter. Don't just think about classes that would normally do. Specifically, think about classes that normally wouldn't use this. I believe, I'm going to look it up here before I say the wrong thing. Oh, there we go. No, it doesn't. I thought the light hammer for a moment. I thought it had the um. I can't remember the name of. Wow, guys, my brain is just gone today. I feel really, really dumb. Finesse. There we go. I thought it had the finesse property. It doesn't, but still, if you want to do something unique and interesting, use those combat training style the things to create a character that normally wouldn't be able to do that, and do something cool. They also get tool proficiency. They get proficiency with either the smith's tools, the brewer supplies, or the mason's tools. None of those really have combat benefits, but role playing and things like that, there's a lot you can do with all of them. So that can be cool. Stonecunning is their next ability, which is basically whenever you make an intelligence history check related to the origin of stonework, you're considered proficient in the history skill and add double your proficiency bonus to the check instead of your normal proficiency bonus. So this is another one where your mileage may vary. Knowledge is power in 5th edition D&D. In RPGs in general, knowledge is power. And being able to understand your surroundings better is always good. If you are underground and you're a dwarf and you're not using Stonecunning, you're probably putting yourself up a bit of a disadvantage simply because there's so many things you could come up with for Stonecunning. It's like, well, with my Stonecunning in this cave, can I tell, how stable this particular stalactite type is? Because that's stonework and rocks and the things like that. Well, yeah, or can I tell exactly how stable this stone gateway is? Okay, make your roll. Okay, I want to use that knowledge to collapse the gate on the enemies, cutting them in half, or cutting their forces in half, so we can deal with only half now and half a little later. Or I want to use my knowledge of stones to collapse this tunnel, or I want to use it to be able to make a new door in this wall. Things like that. Use it to get around problems instead of just going straight at them and hoping that they're, that you're stronger than the problem is. Stonecutting can do that. And then the final thing you get as the base dwarf is your languages, common and dwarvish. Yeah, again, languages, your mileage may vary. Some campaigns it's super important. Some campaigns they just don't talk about it ever, and everybody uses common, but whatever. So that's the base dwarf, and again, it's kind of cool. But like I mentioned before, you have sub races. So when you choose this class, you also get to choose a sub race, which will give you additional benefits. The two that in the PHB are the Hill Dwarf and the Mountain Dwarf. And these are going to help you kind of customize how you wanted to do this. So let's start with the Hill Dwarf. Their ability score increase is you increase your wisdom score by 1. So with a Hill Dwarf, you get the +2 Constitution bonus from being a dwarf and a +1 Wisdom bonus from being a Hill Dwarf. Hill Dwarves are extremely common to see this. To see them as clerics. Dwarven clerics are really, really classic D&D characters. Having a high constitution plus a high wisdom is really useful. The other thing that's nice is you don't have to have a really high strength score to be able to wear heavy armor. As a hill dwarf, so you can put all of your points into your wisdom modifier and just be a casting dwarf that wears heavy armor. Other things like that. The other thing that you can use wisdom for, obviously, wisdom is used by druids, so dwarven druids are not uncommon. And again, that heavy armor can be very useful for druids. And monks, obviously. Now, monks do run into the issue that they can't wear armor and use most of their abilities, so that Ability to wear heavy armor without a strength score doesn't really matter. But the additional wisdom is really good. The additional constitution is really, really good because that means your monk can take a punch. And the limitation where you only have 25 feet of movement is taken off a little bit by the fact that monks are hypermobile. So you're going to be moving faster than your allies. Maybe not as fast as like a wood elf monk, but still moving very, very fast because that's how monks could go. Yeah. And if you go somewhere like a Kensei, you could even use like that battle axe or that warhammer as one of your Kensei weapons, which I realize the Kensei gets proficiency in a weapon to do that, but still, a Dwarven Kensei could be really, really interesting and fun to play. The second thing that Hill Dwarves get is Dwarven Toughness, which is your hit point max increases by 1, and it increases by 1 every time you gain a level. That is a really big deal because we already talked about, because the Constitution score increase in this, you already get a +1 to your hit points no matter what they normally would be. Now you get another one. Hill Dwarves are really, really tanky with a combination of wisdom and Constitution. Like I said, clerics in general, they are very, very tough to kill because they can heal themselves and they can take a lot of damage. Increased hit points are good literally for every class. I almost lost my keyboard there. It's good for literally any class. So the Hill Dwarf really is not limiting you in any way other than the wisdom score aspect is going to be most useful for wisdom-based classes. Even the Ranger, which is going to be very dex-based, but you can use your 14 or your 15 for your dexterity, and then use your 12 for your constitution if you're doing the standard array to give you a 14 constitution, and then use your 13 for your wisdom to give you a 14 wisdom, and then you have 14 dex, 14 con, 14 wisdom, and put the rest wherever you want them. You can have the 15 wherever you want and be really good, or you could do the wisdom be 15 and have a 16 in there. And so there's many other things you can do to make a very interesting character using Hill Dwarf. The next one is the Mountain Dwarf. Your Mountain Dwarf is the one I see more often, simply because a lot of people think dwarves, they think of Gimli from Lord of the Rings, big old battle axe and killing things, or the majority of the 13 traveling companions of Bilbo in The Hobbit. They were all effectively kind of fighter-style characters. And that's kind of what the Mountain Dwarf exemplifies. Their ability score increase is you increase your strength score by 2. That is something that's a little bit unique. Most races, you increase 1 ability score by 2 and 1 ability score by 1. This one you get to increase 2 ability scores by 2, which is really nice. That means your odd numbered ones, if you're using the standard away, your 15 and your 13, you can use for other things, and you can use your 12 and your 14 to give you your main stats you want to use. It does mean Mountain Dwarves, like I said, are very, very common to be fighters. Again, we talk about the Barbarian with +2 to Strength, +2 to Constitution. Mountain Dwarf Barbarians are perfect. They get all the skills. They get all the attributes that Barbarian really counts on. Barbarians eventually get a +4 bonus to both their Strength and Constitution, and can have a max of 24 of each. So Mountain Dwarf Barbarians are really good. They're hypermobile, so that little decrease in speed built into the race is not going to bother them. So yeah, those can be really useful. But you can also go a really useful Paladin. because paladins are generally going to be a strength-based class for their weapon attacks, and then you'll just have your charisma modifier for your casting. Which again, for paladins, you can be a little bit more heavy caster paladin, but a lot of times paladins use most of their spell slots for smiting. So not having a massive charisma score is not going to hurt you massively as a paladin. So you can make a really, really tough paladin with high constitution, high strength, and able to just smite and take tons of damage while wearing that heavy armor that they have the strength score for, but they don't need. Now, the other class I want to talk about after we talk about their second mountain dwarf trait, simply because this is what makes it so interesting. So the second mountain dwarf trait is Dwarven armor training, which gives you proficiency in light and medium armor. So again, a lot of people look at that and go, well, it's light and medium armor. Who the hell cares? Most classes can wear light armor. Medium armor is really limited in the classes where it's actually good, because they have this max. You can use your dexterity to increase your armor class, and they're kind of weird. So I mean, all the classes I would want to play as a mountain dwarf are strength based, and they're already going to have proficiency in that. Some of them are going to have proficiency in heavy armor already. Why would I need this? Well, I want to talk about the rules of spellcasting. Spellcasting, you cannot cast spells in armor you are not proficient in. That's the only limitation. In earlier editions of the D&D, you couldn't cast spells while wearing armor. In 3rd edition, they actually had an armor check failure, where what it was is if you were wearing armor, there was a percentage chance that any spell you cast would just fail. You would waste the spell slot if you were wearing armor. And there were ways to get around that, but it took a lot of feats and it was really confusing. So most classes just didn't, casting classes just didn't wear armor. And that's where, mage armor became a really useful spell, because they couldn't wear armor. In 5th edition, the only rules for casting spells is if you are proficient. So if you become a mountain dwarf wizard, you can cast spells in medium armor. You can take a single feat to give you proficiency in heavy armor and never have to increase your strength or your dexterity, and focus entirely on your intelligence and other feats to make you more powerful. And that's where you can start making really interesting characters, because a full plate wearing wizard is terrifying. Especially if they're come into battle using a warhammer, and the enemies look at him and say, oh, we can just run up to that dude and he's going to hit us with the warhammer, and then he calls down a lightning storm from the sky, or he conjures a massive rain of fire using his warhammer. That is just super badass. And makes for some really interesting characters. So again, when you see these proficiencies, a lot of people are going to think, well, how do I min-max this? Well, I'm not going to be able to. But if you look at it as, well, what if any class I chose could wear medium armor? How would that benefit me? And if you go into something like a caster class, like the wizard, like the sorcerer, like the warlock, and just give them medium armor proficiency, you have just changed how they're going to interact with the world, and how you're going to be able to build the character. So yeah. Overall, like I said, dwarves, super fun. But there is no but. They're super fun. They're super interesting. Again, depending on the subclass that you choose, your kind of golden classes for the dwarf are going to be barbarian, cleric if you're a hill dwarf, barbarian or some other kind of a fighter style if you're a mountain dwarf. If you really want to get crazy, use those extra proficiencies to turn a caster into a melee fighter, because it's really, really interesting and weird and unique. However, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on so you never miss any of these. In the comments down below, what do you think would be the most interesting class that doesn't normally get access to either either the battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and warhammer, or the light and medium armor? What class do you think would be the most fun to just go? I'm gonna have a medium armored artificer. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. Or I want to have a medium armored druid. Yeah, that's where that's where I'm gonna go with. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.